spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out what aspects of each of the planets would be most suitable and a great source of inspiration for the music. Because, we know Mars has a lot of iron on it, which is why it's red. But so what? That really,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to write red music. Okay, what does that mean?
Hi, Dan. It's so lovely to talk to you, Daniel. How do I say that?
Yeah, my formal name is Daniel, but I go by Dan.
You go by Dan, okay. It's so lovely to talk to you. Where are you based?
Hour north of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
So, yeah, in the west side of Pennsylvania.
Oh, I see. Okay. And have you lived there for long?
Yeah, I've been at Westminster College since 2008. So I've lived here since 2008. Before that, I lived in Louisiana, where I had my first professor job. And I'm originally from south of Cleveland, which is just an hour and a half west of here. So.
Oh, I see. So, and you're a composer, and you say you are involved also in teaching?
That's right. So I'm a composer and a professor.
I see. Okay.
And I teach the college students here music theory and composition.
I saw on Facebook this wonderful composition that you did. Is it a Planet Odyssey?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a collaboration between me and Jeffrey Biegel, and he is the piano soloist. And he came to me with, we both wanted to work together, and I said, I'd love to write a concerto for you. And he said, well, he's always wanted one to have a theme associated with the planets, that it would work well programmatically with, there's a lot of other music out there that, of course, not just Gustav Holst, but, the Mozart Jupiter Symphony and other works that have these sort of celestial themes. And so I said, sure, I would love to write a concerto that is a new take on the planets. And so Gustav Holst's work was based on the mythology. Mars, the bringer of war, Jupiter, jovial, or the joviality, and Mercury, the winged messenger. And I wanted to base mine actually on current scientific knowledge of the planets. And in particular, I used imagery from, for example, with Mercury. Mercury's both extremely hot, but also extremely cold at night because it has no atmosphere. So when it turns away from the sun, it's just frigid. But when it turns toward the sun, it's really hot. And then I was thinking about also the vivid imagery of what it would be like to stand on Mercury if you could. You would see the sun, but it would be against a black sky because there's no atmosphere, and the sky would have stars. So you would have the sun and then all the stars. And of course, you would be roasting. It would be extremely hot.
Yeah.
And so I used that, for example, as the basis of the Mercury variation. So it's a theme and variations form, where the theme is of the pianist who is sort of traveling through our solar system, visiting each planet. And then each planet is a variation on that theme. And so that's the Mercury variation. It's a much more sort of aggressive and contrasting kind of variation than you would have like in the Holst, where it's very fluttery and very figurative. And so then, I go through each planet in order as well. Of course, the next would be Venus. And that one is very, scientists now believe it might be possible that there could be forms of life way up in the atmosphere in Venus. And it would be an odd form of life, but, it's potential. Something could actually exist up there. And so it's that movement or that variation is very, it has a lot of figuration. It's very fluttery sounding, very mysterious. And so I'm using the scientific knowledge of our current knowledge of the planets to inform how the composition unfolds. I don't have an Earth variation, but I do have a Mars one. And the story of Mars is a really sort of a sad story, actually, because it was sort of like Earth at first, and then it lost its magnetic field, which meant its atmosphere sort of evaporated and got a lot less hospitable, and it got colder, and it might have been able to sustain life at one point, and then over time it didn't. And so it's this sort of tragic story and of a planet's development, if you think of it from the life perspective. And in the Mars movement, there are references to Holst's Bringer of War. So there are certain aspects of it that remind me of it. But again, it's its own concept. Jupiter, on the other hand, it's one of the gas giant planets. So I wanted to use the very large and massive, atmosphere of Jupiter as a way to inspire the music. And so the music is very, again, uses a lot of figuration. It's very, for lack of a better word, atmospheric for Jupiter. But because Jupiter is big and also has a lot of storms, there's also a contrasting stormy section for Jupiter. And then as it moves on, I also have Uranus, Neptune, and I do actually include a movement for, or a variation for beyond Neptune. Uranus is a planet whose axis is on its side. So I take that as a chance to invert the theme. And so the theme is presented sort of with the second part first, and it's compositionally inverted. And it's sort of this mysterious planet with a lot of sulfur on it. So it's a very, it's a very different kind of space, and I try to capture that in the music. And then Neptune is extremely windy. The winds up there in Neptune can get up to 1,200 miles an hour. So it's extraordinarily windy. And it's and I use that as a way to sort of capture a much more, I forgot Saturn. I'll have to tell you about Saturn. But with Neptune, I try to capture the windy atmosphere. And so it really, I use musical means to capture the sparkly aspects too. There's a lot of ice and a lot of wind. I forgot to mention Saturn. On Saturn, scientists think that there might be diamond rain, which, can you imagine raining diamonds? So that was the image I had in my mind when I was composing Saturn. It's a slower, more contemplative variation where, imagine picking up some of these diamonds in your hand and, just as they come through the rain. So really vivid imagery for Saturn. And then finally, I also included a variation on the Kuiper belt, which includes Pluto and some other planets beyond, because Pluto is a dwarf planet. So when Holst wrote his piece, Pluto hadn't been discovered yet. But then when Pluto was discovered, it was thought of as a planet, and then scientists demoted it to a dwarf planet. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just include all of the dwarf planets in the Kuiper belt, which is beyond Neptune. And I use that as a way to close the piece, and it's called the Kuiper belt in the universe beyond. So it's a very expansive sort of finale to the composition. So I hope that gives you an overview.
Yeah, this is amazing. I mean, I would just love to hear all that, and in connection with this information. And did you take each planet and really thought about that before you started? Did you work on each planet at a time?
Yes, I did. I wrote the piece completely chronologically, and so I wrote the theme first, and then I went completely in order: Mercury, Venus, etc., all the way out to the Kuiper belt. And I did that also because with each variation, the use of the theme keeps changing. And as I mentioned, by the time you get out to Uranus and Neptune, the theme is inverted, but you couldn't have known how that was going to happen as a composer, and that I couldn't have known that except, I had to have written the rest of the piece first to get to that point where it would make logical sense in the piece. So I definitely wrote it in order, and I did my own research, looked up current scientific knowledge on each planet before I actually wrote it, so that I could use that as specific inspiration for each movement or each variation.
How much in depth did you go in this research? How much did you need to really know,
Yeah, that's a great question. I really did. I read, there are periodicals that are appropriate for, for sort of a general audience. And so, I don't have a PhD in physics or astrophysics or anything, or astronomy, but I did look at articles that were written by high-level scientists for a general audience. And so I spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out what aspects of each of the planets would be most suitable and a great source of inspiration for the music. Because, we know Mars has a lot of iron on it, which is why it's red. But so what? That really... Well, I'm going to write red music. Okay, what does that mean? So I needed to find things that were true about the planets that were also inspirational and interesting, and frankly also relevant to the human experience, which is why I focus so much on the potential for life in Venus and Mars, and why I focused on the stormy, the gases, but then the stormy aspects of Jupiter, because Jupiter has lightning and thunderstorms, and we can relate to that. And why with Saturn, I focused on raining diamonds, because again, diamonds are precious to us, and so we could also relate to the imagery. So I definitely chose scientific aspects of these planets that were also something that we as humans could find compelling.
Now, what you've also done now is that you've brought science and music together, really. Mm-hmm. And what a great educational project this is. Can you see this being used in, say, for instance, education in schools or so?
I would love, if people were interested in doing that, I would love for it to be. And certainly, yeah, I mean, I think it would be a great way to enhance students' understanding of the planets, but also be a great way to combine understandings from different fields. So on the one hand, there's the scientific or astronomical research, but on the other hand, there's the how does a composer, how does a musician or an artist create something of aesthetic interest out of that? So there's an interdisciplinary aspect of that too, and I could see college students studying it for those aspects, seeing the interdisciplinary links, but certainly in younger grades, just as a way into the planets, but also then as a way into classical art music, because you might have some kids who are very interested in space, and then they could learn, of course, the Holst, which is a wonderful piece, but then a 21st century perspective on the planets in a different medium, a piano concerto, as opposed to a more tone poem kind of thing. And that would be another great way to introduce kids who might be interested in the science, but who might not have known about the classical pieces.
Exactly. I mean, I think this would be so great to make this link in the schools, to teach the science part of it, but also to sort of create an appreciation for the music and for how music can be used to inform as well, or to give certain impressions, I would say. Like you say now with the raining diamonds, how you've written that in music can be something that it's a way of experiencing it by listening to the music.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And to that end, I also think it's extremely important in the performance of this for audience members to have the program notes, of course. I mean, it really enhances the experience, and from what you're talking about. And in the performance, I don't know if it's going to happen in the premiere, but it also would work well with visual and multimedia elements. So,
yes.
So that, yeah.
Can you just imagine? And I'm just thinking, is there not somebody, a choreographer, who would be able to do something with dance as well in this?
I'm sure there could. That's another dimension beyond, but yeah.
Amazing. I mean, this can just has no end, really.
Yeah.
But so now the premiere. Tell me, is there orchestra? And you say Jeffrey is he playing the piano?
That's correct. So Jeffrey is the piano soloist. The orchestra is the Canton Symphony, which is conducted by Gerhard Zimmermann. And it is based in the city of Canton, which is an hour south of Cleveland, or about an hour and a half west of Pittsburgh. So it gives you a picture of where about it is. Canton is a smaller city, but it's not tiny. But it has had the Canton Symphony Orchestra actually is quite well regarded in the region. It has been built in large part by the work of Gerhard Zimmermann. It's featured on the regional national public radio station frequently, and it's quite a good orchestra. So we're really, really looking forward to it being premiered by this group.
Yes. And will there be a recording or a live streaming?
Looking into that option as we speak. I hope there will be. And I do have a simulated recording that I created on the computer for this. So I could send you the simulated recording so you can hear.
Yes, that would be great. I would love
how it. Yeah, and I could also send you the score if you wanted to follow along with the score so you could see, where the movements happen, or the variations, happen. And that will tell you, this is Mars, this is Jupiter, or whatever. It'll be pretty clear from listening to it, because even if you didn't have the score, because the mood does change pretty significantly every time there's a new planet. So.
Yeah. Oh, but this is great. Now, I think I love the fact that it's like this connection, and I love the fact that it's, could be also very educational and be used for younger children, but also can be used, like you say, for studying, for studying composition and music. I mean, I'm not very clued up with how exactly you teach, but would this be something you could also use for your students?
Yeah, so certainly it's a great way to show composition students how to use both current scientific knowledge and imagery associated with that knowledge as a point of departure for creating musical material. And once the musical material is created, then the music that spins off of that can certainly develop on its own. And so as I think about it in terms of teaching, I would think about it as, you have your source of inspiration, but then the music sort of has a life of its own, and the composer almost just gives the music its own voice. Kind of like, how if you're riding a horse and the horse knows where it's going, you sort of guide the horse, but the horse knows. I know that sounds sort of metaphysical and strange, but I find that to be true after a while of composing a piece. It ends up having its own sort of inevitability to it. Like, I know that has to happen next. I know that has to develop in that way because the music has its own internal logic, and it really just has to do that. And certainly when I'm teaching, I also convey that to my students, that the music has to have its own internal logic. It has to make sense. And then as you keep working with the motives and the themes and varying them, if it's theme and variations, you base it on what you've heard, of course, and you have written before, but every time you keep shaping it, the motives and the themes develop. And so development in music is linking back to what's familiar and then changing it slightly so that it evolves, as opposed to something that may not be developmental, where you're constantly just throwing new stuff at the audience. Now, I recognize there are different approaches to composition. But my approach is that um, I love to develop musical material within its framework that I set up. And but no matter what a composer does, and this is something I also like to tell my students, the music has to have its own internal concept, whatever that concept or logic is. It has to have something, or else it's just random and frankly not a great experience for anyone to listen to.
Yeah. Have you, when you started this project now, and as you went along, was there something that you in the end thought, I never expected it to end up being this? Did you have something in mind and then it changed completely towards the end?
That's a great question. So certainly when I first set out to write it, I had no idea what really what any of the variations were ultimately going to look like. I wrote the theme. The theme was, it's a mysterious kind of theme centered on the piano. And until I did my research, I didn't know that Mercury was actually going to be a rather aggressive movement. Because of the contrast between, unspeakably hot versus frigid all in a day. And then, the bright sun against a black sky with stars. But after I did that research, I knew the music had to be music of aggressive contrasts. So then, of course, when I did my research on Saturn, then I knew two reasons why I settled in on raining diamonds. One, Jupiter was the movement or the variation before, that is Jupiter, was beautiful and large and huge, and just like the planet is, just huge and intense. So I needed to take it back because not everything can be huge in the piece, right? And so I need to scale that back. So Saturn, for maximal contrast in the logic of the composition, needed to be and much more introverted and contemplative. So that led me to, when I was doing my research, to focus specifically on raining diamonds, when I could have focused on a million other aspects of Saturn. Or I could have done something with the rings, or I could have done something with the moons. But I needed the image of the raining diamonds. I needed the contrast in the music. I needed it to be intimate and scaled back and like someone examining these diamonds in their hand, for it to work musically. So you see, it's a dynamic interplay between the logic of the composition and the scientific knowledge. And I use the scientific knowledge in service of the composition. But I couldn't have known any of that when I first wrote the theme. Mm. So that's a great question.
Yeah, and now that you hear the orchestra and that you hear the music, is it what you heard in your head, or is it how you heard the tune or the music?
It's a great question, but I haven't heard the orchestra yet.
So. Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're not at rehearsals yet. They'll happen in January, to my knowledge. And so, I can't wait to go to rehearsals, and I can't wait to, to hear it for the first time. And that's frequently what'll happen is if a premiere is farther away, this one's not that far away from me, so I can go to the rehearsals. But if the premiere is, like one I had this weekend was in Iowa, I showed up for the dress rehearsal. The orchestra had heard the music before I ever had.
Really?
So.
And then how much input do you still have then by that point?
Very little. what I did was I sat in the audience and I worked with the conductor to make sure that the balance was right, because they were in a new or a different acoustical space from what they were used to performing in. And so there were spots where certain parts were too loud and other spots were too soft and relative to the other instruments. So I was useful for that purpose. But in terms of other things, most of it was set. I did a little bit of interpretive commentary, but most of it was done. That was it. Okay. And you trust that as a composer, you trust that your notation is specific enough and sufficient to do what it needs to do, so that ultimately, once you deliver it, the musicians do the job.
Do you like the fact that you can have, these conversations with the conductors, for example, or would you like also people to have some sort of an interpretation and present it in a way that they interpret it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like it both ways, of course. In an ideal world, you do both. I love how there will be times when a performer will bring an interpretation to what I'm doing, and an approach to my composition that I think, oh my God, that's wonderful. It makes it even better. And so I will incorporate their suggestion into the final draft. And there's a long history of composers doing that, with I think it was Brahms working with Joachim, the violinist, or whatever. Their composers will frequently take feedback from expert performers and then incorporate it. And I do love when that happens. By the same token, if I'm not able to be there, they'll do what they do, and I show up for the performance if I can't even make a rehearsal. I've been in situations like that. And then I listen to it, and most of the time, especially if you're working with really good performers, it's wonderful, at least in my experience. There have been times, though, where it's like, ooh, they did that. Ooh, I wish they hadn't. But yeah. If I'm honest. Yeah. But, then I realize, okay, well, then I should mark no retardando in the score here for the future.
Yeah. Oh, wow. But Dan, it's so interesting, your work, but tell me, what do you do when you don't compose?
That's a great question.
What do you do in your spare time?
Yeah, I'm very busy. So, obviously my job with teaching, of course, keeps me busy too. But I have a family, my wife and 2 daughters. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so of course, I spend a great deal of time with them. And they, they're wonderful. The 7-year-old is learning piano, and
wow.
Yeah, she's taking lessons with a faculty member here at the college, and but I help her practice sometimes. We love playing games. Our girls love board games, family games. So and we travel, and frankly, I love my composition career because it involves a lot of travel, but for fun, we travel, and we love to travel for fun. And yes, the coronavirus has complicated that, but before the virus, we'd love to go to the American West because it's so beautiful out there. And I'm always looking for inspiration from natural landscapes. A lot of my music is inspired by natural landscapes. So we love traveling. We've restricted some of our travel a little bit to the east area, but even last summer we traveled a good deal. My family, my girls love the ocean, and so we traveled to the sea too. And between travel and playing games with the girls, I do some I'm working on a fairy house for them out of a log.
Really?
So
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
so now the fairy house is taking a while because it, but they're excited about it, and I have
Yeah.
to make some progress on it. But
And is it their input? Do they have their ideas, and you have to now listen to what they're saying?
exactly, it's a collaboration actually, and
Okay.
they drew the door and the windows on the log, and I'm working on chiseling it out, and then eventually we're going to decorate it. So.
Oh, that is so sweet. Oh, I think that is so wonderful that you do that for them. We must still believe in fairies, I think.
Oh yeah,
As
I
long
do.
as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely for them, it's so important.
Yes. And that this imagination, to keep their imagination going and so on. How much do they have interest in what you are doing in your composing?
That's a great question. They love it. I will play sometimes when I get a recording, of course, I'll play my real music. They love listening to, I have a recording of my recent overture to Spring with the Moravian Philharmonic in the Czech Republic. And that was recorded in 2016 or 17. And they'll ask, Daddy, can we listen to Spring on, on the recording? Yeah. When I can take them to concerts with my music, I do. By the time The Planets is premiered, I will feel safe enough, with the vaccines and all that, so we could take the girls to the premiere of that. They love coming to that. And and they hear me compose, and they hear me playing things on the piano, or they hear me writing stuff. And my older daughter would even start to recognize the different themes in my first piano concerto, Before the Planets, in the sonata form, back, and how it was developed. And she even said, oh, but you changed it there in the development, and that my favorite part, what did you do to it? And I said, well, I did this, I flipped it around. And she said, well, I guess I'll call it my funny favorite part. And so they both, and my other daughter too, they love listening to the music, and they listen very critically and they'll also tell me if they don't like something too. So.
Well, I spoke to over the lockdown period. I did a series of interviews with artists in lockdown, and I actually spoke to a young composer. I think he was still studying, but he said that he did a little project at a school once where he, with very young children, did a sort of a little composition workshop or composing workshop. And he said he was amazed at what they came up with, without any music education or without that background, that they came up with. And I always find this story so interesting. And I think it would be so wonderful if young children in school get more opportunity to be involved in something like that, or exposed to something like that,
For sure, yeah. Because the creativity, natural creativity, I think, is present, but then over time, we're so interested in conforming to different rules and expectations. And while I understand how that's necessary on the one hand, with, of course, rigorous approaches to various academic fields, and I'm sympathetic to that as a professor and academic, and I myself was always very good at school. But by the same token, I think it's a problem when we get so caught up in meeting requirements that young people's natural creativity then becomes, where does it go? It's sort of like the light fades. And that's sad to see. And so I would love to keep that going.
Yeah.
For kids.
But it's wonderful that they have the opportunity to grow up in a house where, where they hear the music and the way they see you work and also hear what you compose, and that you say your daughter already can notice certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But Dan, thank you so much for your time. This was so interesting. And I'm going to, well, I follow you on Facebook anyway, so I see what you're up to. And I mean, I have contact with Jeffrey as well. I've done an interview with him as well, with other projects that he's doing. And I'm so happy that he's involved in your project as well. He's doing such great work for musicians as well. And yeah, what a lovely collaboration this is.
Well, thank you so much. And I'll send you the score and the simulated recording, and so you can have the pleasure of listening to it. And yeah, and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, but have a lovely day.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Okay, Dan.
Okay.
Bye.
Take care.